Well, at the outset, the members of the panel, I would like to Professor Lehman and Dr. Toth. They have already have seen the video, so I'd like to have the commentary members to introduce themselves. So please. So I would like to invite Mr. Furuta, if you will, please. Thank you very much for having me here today. Oh, thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Daisuke Furuta. My background is I used to be an editor and journalist at Asahi Shimbun, and leaving Asahi Shimbun in 2015. BuzzFeed, in the expansion of the U.S. company to Japan, I had been an editor-in-chief for 3 years in Japan, and in being independent in 2019. The news media, the innovation, how we pursue the innovation is the area of my interest. So being a freelance journalist, many of the digital transformation, many of the media had been able to participate in the initiative. And now I belong to a Google News Lab. And this Google News Lab is also advocating the new initiative in news. So as an individual, I have been very much intrigued and interested in talking on this theme. So thank you very much. So first of all, in terms of the presentation from two of the lecturers, if I may comment, I must say it's in terms of the notion of trust, many important insight has been highlighted. Thank you very much. So Professor Benjamin Toth, in terms of acquiring trust, the perspective is being a journalist and being an audience, there's a discrepancy and gap. And that I think is a very important perspective. Well, journalists in terms of transparency of creating the news, and the journalist and user are more individual or personal or more intimate sort of a dialogue or having understanding on both is the perspective. The user is the brand itself, how the brand has been disseminating the news, the brand equity, the brand history, how the news are being talked about in narrative. So narrative are more important. And there are some misunderstanding, maybe in a way, between these two parties. And from this perspective, what is evident is a journalist, those may have not been able to understand the viewers. That's the big issue. Well, at a New York State University, Professor Jeff Jervis, I attended his lecture. He always say that journalists as a service. It's a journalism as a service. Journalists, the audience and users, the value, the essence of the value that we offer to the users. In other words, the journalism, the essence of the value we create to the users, we have to go and tap in and ask the feedback from the users. We need to understand what the user is thinking. So the professor has repeatedly taught me about that importance. And I don't know how this word is so authentic and real, but in terms of Dr. Benjamin Toth, that there's a gap between the users and journalists, I think is well represented, and it echoed very strongly in myself. So at this point in time, in the discussion, I would like to ask Ms. Sally Lehman that in fulfilling this gap, that trust project, this initiative, is it possible to fulfill this gap? Is a question I have. So the trust project itself, the traditional journalist or the journalism, that perspective I feel was quite strong in this initiative of the trust project. The trust project itself, in terms of last point made by Dr. Toth, trusted third party, the trusted third party, alliance with the trusted party, the trusted third party, to be a trusted third party, what needs to be done? So the trust, in acquiring the trusted project has been created its genesis of that. But the trusted project itself have to be trusted by the users. Otherwise, ultimately, it does not lead to the development of the new trustworthiness. So in other words, as Mr. Matsumoto mentioned at the introduction, I think it's very important. The media, in terms of the information that's been disseminated, there's an arrogance. It is to be believed. And that journalism, that arrogance resides within us, the journalists. So this is the truth and the fact. That is the reason why people are now talking about trust around the world. But starting about the discussion of trust and various research undergoing, but the trust that is believed by the journalists, trust believed by the user, that completely different terms. So therefore, how are we going to fulfill this gap? So in terms of trust, the discussion is more advanced in the Western part of the world. And it's very important and valuable for us to learn from these lessons. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. So that'll be all from me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Kumada. I'm one of the commentary. I've been working 30 years for NHK Natural Broadcasting Company. I was a producer. I was a reporter. And NHK is inside Japan. It's close to the politics, and that's the nature of our media. It's a national broadcasting company. But my mission, there's a network newsroom in 2017 within NHK, and NHK is going to have been evolved to public broadcaster to public media, and it's now 4 years. And I graduated from NHK. I am now working as a slow news online media as a senior content producer. And from that perspective, it's especially at NHK, the initiative that I've undertaken, I would like to shed some light in this area. So the two lecturers, a lot of learning. Thank you so much, Professor Riemann and Dr. Toff. And Dr. Toff, you mentioned about exactly what Mr. Furuta mentioned. There is a sense of notion that in the network newsroom in NHK, we've been saying that journalists and media, what we want to communicate in itself, it's really is a perspective of journalist that has been trained to be a professional journalist. That's important. But the bureaucrats and private companies and also the politician, sometimes it's on par with these parties and members and stakeholders. In other words, do we really know the users? Some of the non-verbal social issue, maybe the professional journalist technology and capabilities is impossible to embracing these non-worded, unworded sort of issues. So what users are really wanting in terms of the insight, we need to have a tool and means in order to tap into this user's perspective. I always spend about 90 minutes in presenting this topic, so I would like to be short. But digital network, local network, utilizing this both means in achieving the clusters and community and achieving engagement is what I'm advocating. And that is the challenge that I made at NHK. It's like BBC News in Japan. And the other challenge is gaining trust. It's not well described or presented. I've done two things. One is that the article that you can envisage the face. What I mean by that is in terms of the reporting of the news and coverage of the news, or some of the chief and editors, the critiques is quite opposite to that. It's a first party sort of a writing. It's not the opinion, but why is that journalist covering that story? How it is the story is being covered? What documents are being utilized? And where has this been covered? So it is the users or readers. It's like science. It's reproducible. The reader can follow how these articles have been created. And that's one thing. And the first party is, in terms of being able to envision the face or the person, is the theme or the issue. The person as a centerpiece of that coverage of the article should also be quite explicit. What I mean by that is in terms of some of the labor issues of part-time workers, not full-time workers. We say that labor issues that are confronted to the part-time workers, not to talk as in terms of the objective perspective. Well, what's happening to that individual and what is that pain point for that? You'd be able to sort of envisage the person and put meat or tangible thoughts on that. Then the readers would think that it's one's own problem, not a problem on the other side of the river. So you'd be able to see what the problem is. And you can envision the face of the person who's encountering this problem. So NHK, when we cover the stories, and we have the political magazine, and we have done this through my effort. So this is the journalist. And many of the viewers have said that I will applaud you for NHK. It was worthwhile paying the tax for NHK because now I can really resonate with the article that's been written by NHK. And Mr. Sally Raymond, I have the same understanding with Mr. Furuta. And we have the special appeal, the Pulitzer Award, and we try to appeal them. But for the readers, that's irrelevant. I mean, it's trying to put you a power, or the readers are very sensitive about that the fact that we are quite arrogant, and appealing the fact that we have so many accolades and awards is negative. And the key mark is another issue in terms of getting a sort of a empowerment, too much of an empowerment. And it seems as though that the media have a special power and privilege over the others. And after that, the people who are maybe on the other side of the river may come up with a different certification mission. So this is the area that I'm interested in discussing. Thank you.
Wakai-san, please. Thank you. I'm from Yomiuri newspaper. 1988, I joined Yomiuri newspaper at the social segment. 2008, I have involved with the IT industry. Currently, I am the senior writer, still working on this IT industry. The two lecturers, I learned a lot from the two guest speakers. Thank you very much. With Ms. Lerman's initiative, splendid initiative. And we need to set up a good protecting wall. But what we face now, this could be a good prescription for Japanese media in gaining trust or not. As it was pointed out, the indicators, so the good coverage is done, the quality of journalist practice. So these are the indicators, but trust is declining in media. Although we do have a good journalistic practice in place, I'd like to share my thought on this later on. And having more and more platforms, that's my concern, because I might be too sensitive and nervous about this emergence of platformers. The Trust Project provides the indicators, but it's up to each audience to determine and assess the trust in each media outlet. But with trust mark, and some people would just believe in that trust mark and don't examine the content of the coverage itself. But I think that it's natural that with that mark, people would tend to believe what these organizations tell you. But some people there might be some concern that some policy might laid out that only trusted mark have organization articles can be shown on some platform. So I'm just concerned whether this association with Trustmark and how the platformers would handle them. And over time, there might be the case where unless you have Trustmark, no one would read the news. So here in Japan, unless your article is on Yahoo News, no one would read your article. So this how the platform can be used, that's my concern. And this is my personal opinion. In order for media to survive, they shouldn't depend too much on platform that is provided by other parties. Once you rely on them, you have to depend on them to reach your audience. So this dependency on platform is my concern. So looking at the existing platform and the good media, they can join hands to demonstrate its powerful value. And also like to learn from Sally-san, the Google, Facebook are your partners in the trust project. So what kind of support you are getting from them? And with this trust marked one, with Google search algorithm, with this trust mark in place, the articles would show up top toward the page of the search result or not. So and also funding of the platform that might be leading to some risk and concerns about the neutrality and independence of the media. And also there are power of AI that needs to be put in to support so many things. So with Trust Project, you are vetting each individual's journalistic and organizations reliability. But when it comes to each individual article's reliability, there might be some posted hate or things. So AI has some role to play in order to determine whether things should be put on the media or not. And for Professor Tov, such shocking things as the two gentlemen mentioned earlier, the trust on the part of thinking on the journalists and the trust on the part of users is a gap. And that was a shocking thing. And it was really convincing at the finding of the report. But I might not change my behavior or my thinking, but Benjamin-san pointed out this is a mindset of a journalist, but I kind of stick to that traditional thinking as a journalist. Here in Japan, specifically, why we have lost trust in media because of the inaccurate things we have communicated and we didn't make correction. So many things we can reflect back, and the Japanese readers think that's a problem on the part of media. So journalistic view and the audience view are in alignment, I think. So familiarity and the casual kind of things. But things, if we miscommunicated things that are not accurate, people would not forgive us, the media. So fake news issue, Kumada-san, Furuta-san are the experts on these things. So I asked them to talk about it, but how media can be a contributor in solving social divide. With Professor Toff, some people are indifferent to the news and what's happening in the world, and it does not justify the cost to try to reach these people, but we cannot just ignore them. So the major media has responsibility here to reach these indifferent people in order to solve this social divide. This could be one way to gain trust in media. And NHK Machikado Japan is a program by NHK. In the streets, people listening to music, wearing some earphone. What are you listening to? What is the song? How come you're listening to that song? And get the voice of people in the street, in town. So content needs to be personalized. So the echo chamber, the society, we see less and less resonance. And the earphone symbolizes this kind of buzz divide and individualistic approach. But the NHK reporter let one person, what kind of song are you listening to? You're a bit lengthy in your thinking. So tries to kind of create resonance on the part of the people. The people in the street who is interviewed and also viewer of the program. Thank you. Thank you. So many people. I know that they can talk and go on like 30 minutes. So this is my magic bell. So when time is up, I will just use this bell. Sorry about this, but thank you for your cooperation. Six-san, please. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Seki. I have prepared some foil. I would like to be short and succinct on my part of the presentation, but so far, the members of the journalists have been sharing their belief. And I am at Team Insight, so Code for Japan. It's a promoting civic tech, and that is what I belong as an organization. And digital agency, the government agency in Japan, I'm in charge of the open society. And in terms of open Japan, creating the world together, it's a vision that we try to strive for this community. And today's, of course, topic is very interesting, but the civil society, how they will be able to participate in establishing trust and offering environment for that. So to the government, we are not trying to criticize them, but the government will be open, transcending some of the silos. We are trying to generate trust with the civil community. So today's theme, therefore, is quite close to what we are doing on a day-to-day business. So I was very intrigued by this topic. And first of all, the presentation by two lecturers, I was very overwhelmed. And in terms of myself participating in the civil activities, why it was so intriguing, I would like to introduce some of them. Because this project, well, it's really empowering the citizen empowerment. So that is the area where I was intrigued. So in terms of what's been discussed so far, not only information one way of how it's been offered, but it's really the recipient of the citizens, how they feel, how they take on the information. That's another important aspect, especially in the agenda. I would like to participate is some of the wordings. And in the trust project, the indicator, the before and after the implementation, how the people's mindset and attitude have changed also have been alluded by Professor Lehman, but it's the citizens leveraging increasing the literacy is another area. And I think that activity as a citizen community, that's the area I think we would be able to cooperate together on that. So some of the area is that collecting the voices of the citizen. It leads to convincing the news and media. So it's always user-centric. So that I think is a very important aspect from my takeaway. And citizen participation, of course, is another key. And these thinking in Japan, the government is as an open agenda. We talked about agile governance. It's all multi-stakeholders having a dialogue and discussion, and the various governance need to be made open or to be shared, to create rather the governance is in Japan. There are a lot of thoughts that are put forth in terms of agile governance. METI, there is a report of Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and there are some resemblance in terms of discussion today. Citizen community, inclusive of governance, in terms of how the organization should be, the top-down decision, in other words, it is not that the citizen will follow the top-down decision, but dialogue is most important. So therefore, in Japan, in terms of the thought of trust, is quite close to what we are trying to embrace here in Japan. And Code for Japan is a civic tech, the activity undertaken, and the civic tech I would like to briefly introduce what we are doing is, for instance, fact-checking around the world. The citizen communities and nonprofit organization engaged in various activities. And there are a lot of 350 plus on this database introducing some of the active initiative undertaken around the world. But in Japan, unfortunately, we don't have those activities initiated by the citizens so far. So that's really regrettable in a way. But I think this is a good starting point for us, a good opportunity for us to consider this importance of that. So the question is, where do we need to start from? How can we get started? So we'd like to discuss that aspect today. And again, briefly, in Taiwan, co-facts community exists. And it's really the individual news are being evaluated. It's a volunteer news checkers or reviewers, each of the articles saying that, let's say this article is dubious or not dubious. The citizens will be able to vote on that. And the fact checking is done by the collective group. It's a grassroots activities. And the other is that this is a quite interesting pilot that sustainability, the financial sustainability inclusive, how are we going to manage and operate these projects? So that's another important aspect. Recently, these fact-checking and in terms of Web3 decentralized governance, I think it does fit well with this thought because like fact protocol, this is DAO organization, and it is a distributed organization. And so these, well, how, in what is a scheme for opening the governance and seeking for transparency and equity. These new, of course, environment is also another area that we could consider. So that will be all from myself. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Seki-san. So Professor Yamamoto, please. Thank you very much. In terms of today's symposium, I am one of the organizer, KGRI. I am from the Keio University Global Research Institute, and I am from the Faculty of Law, and I'm a Deputy Director at KGRI, and I'm a professor. And in terms of, I'm the expert in constitutional information law. So thinking about this digital issue about the privacy and internet society, the freedom of speech is another area of my research as well. And as of now, in terms of Ministry of Internal Coordination and Telecommunication, I'm also the members of the ministry. And in terms of trust project undertaken by Professor Lehman, I'm very much interested. And as Ms. Wakaya mentioned, in terms of the pension economy, the economic model, I'm very much interested in what she had said. So at the status quo, the attention of people, in order to get the attention, it's hard to say, but how people's perception, the areas of perception could be stimulated. And it's really a competition for that. It's not really the content of the information, that the convincingness or trustworthiness, no, that's a secondary. It's like stimulating the perception, and it's a competition for that. And also we have a lot of concern to that. So getting the attention, the various information, the mixture of truth and fake are all mixed up. So for us, how do we need to select this information? How should we be selective? on the, because it's running on the platform, the informations are all flat. If you go to the bookstore, then a certain category of your interest, a book or magazine, you know where it is in the bookstore, and then these are the new publications. It's separated by the bookshelf, and we would sort of understand where that book is located, and then we can get the sort of judgment of whether that information is trustworthy or not. But now it's on the platform, everything is flat, horizontal. So digital native people do not have the experience of going to the bookstore. So what information is trustworthy? Is it journalistic? Is it non-journalistic? Everything in line, on par. So therefore, the information, whether it's good or bad, not knowing it, we try to go after something that's stimulating, and we intake and we are craving for the stimulus. And in fact, at the University of Tokyo, with Professor Purumi, information health. I'm also participating in this information health. And at this group, some sort of we tend to consume a lot of stimulant, and it really is a health problem, an information health issue. So the meta information in food, the nutrition, in terms nutrition label or indication, that also is needed in information as well. In other words, you should not consume junk food. So that is the meta information, and trust project therefore is something that is of great learning for the information health. And on top of that, there are several things that I would like to submit on the table for further discussion.
One of them, that the trustworthy news and information, we need to build that, and media needs to build that. And the incentive on the part of media to try to get trust, the economy model, attention economy model, the trust building does not necessarily lead to better economic performance, but Sally-san's lecture told us that the trust would lead to better business, but I'm not that optimistic about it. The attention economy, we see there are some contradicting factors. So how do you relate the trust with the business performance on the part of news organization as one point? I need to see more discussion. And other panelists told the trustworthiness of trust indicators. How do you gain the trust on the trust indicators themselves, the reliability? So we're talking about how reliable the media could be. So this assessment organizations itself, how they can gain trust and trustworthiness, reliability and trust in media, and also how people look at media, trust in media. So there are two aspects. The trust from media, trust media was called the fourth power. So they have very huge power. So they were not so reluctant to be evaluated themselves by the public or the people. So Sally-san's project, what kind of conversation did you have with the media? Do you see still some struggle in talking about how open media can be to be evaluated by the users? And the second point, there are mistrust in media, in society, certain segment of people. So untrusting people on media, how for those people you can nurture the trust in trust indicators on these untrusting segment. There might be people who think that this kind of trust certifying organization, trust indicator organization might have some too friendly conversation and relationship with the media organization.